So as is our tradition at these Bible and Archaeology Fest events, we've had this nice dinner, which I hope you all enjoyed. But we also, like, ever since the days of Herschel, we've always tried to have like a panel, sort of discussion panel. And last year we had the idea of making it less sort of, back and forth with senior scholars and more bringing some younger scholars to the stage who can really sort of present on top discoveries over the past year. Maybe those things you've read about, maybe you haven't read about. And so we brought, again this year, two wonderful scholars, Chris McKinney and Erica Brown, to talk about top discoveries in the biblical world in 2024. This year a joint collaboration between Erica's Just So You Know platform on social media, as well as Gesher Media and the Biblical Archaeology Society. So just to move on, I definitely want to give the floor to Chris and Erica. I'll briefly introduce them. Dr. Chris McKinney is the Director of Research at Gesher Media, where he's working on several major projects, including the theatrical docudrama Legends of the Lost Ark, being creator, writer, and host. Chris serves as faculty member at Jerusalem University College in Israel and is an active archaeologist and biblical scholar with a PhD from Bar Ilan University in Israel. Chris frequently publishes articles in peer-reviewed journals and teaches courses on biblical archaeology and historical geography. He also co-hosts the Biblical World podcast, which I highly recommend if you are into podcasts, which explores the archaeological, historical, geographical, and cultural backgrounds of the Bible. Chris is also a core staff member of the Tel Burna Archaeological Project, which some of you may have heard of, and is involved in numerous other writing and research projects. So thank you for joining us again, Chris. Erica Brown has a passion for archaeology and a commitment to sharing her knowledge with the public, which is something we believe in very strongly at the Biblical Archaeology Society. Currently pursuing a PhD in archaeology at the Lanier Center for Archaeology at Lipscomb University, Erica specializes in the I always find intriguing area of ancient Israelite sexual practices. She's promised me a bar article on this at some point. If she ever can. Beyond the classroom, she has excavated at Gesher and Tel Burna in Israel, contributing valuable insights to our understanding of the biblical past. She's also worked most recently with the epigraphic project at the Karnak Temple in Luxor, Egypt, which I believe Mark Jensen may have mentioned in his talk earlier today, further deepening her expertise in the ancient Near East. Erica is a powerful advocate for biblical archaeology, introducing the subject to those around her and fostering a deeper understanding of our shared history. As the creator and host of Just So You Know, which I really highly recommend, an amazing podcast venture, a thriving social media project, Eric presents biblical archaeology to a very wide audience. With thousands of followers and viewers, she's making history accessible and engaging to everyone. Finally, Eric is not only a dedicated scholar, but also an Army veteran. So thank you both very much, and I look forward to contributing whatever I can to this very interesting discussion between the two of you. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
Well, we just wanted to take an opportunity to talk about the top finds, but it's an opportunity for us to dialogue about them. A lot of times what people don't realize is that archaeologists come together and we nerd out on epic proportions about different things. And a lot of times when we present, you only get to see us as proper scholars. And it's just data, which is awesome. Don't go, I'm not knocking that. But one of the beautiful things is our discourse about the data. And we want to talk about these finds, but we also want to, have a conversation about them, talk about our different views, our different ways of interpreting this data, what this data presents, and the opportunities that it presents for us as scholars.
I'll just start by saying that, one of the funny things about archaeologists is when they get together with friends who are other archaeologists, they typically don't usually talk about football or politics. No. They usually talk about archaeology.
Yes, we do. Excited.
Yeah, we're excited about work even when we're outside of work. And so this is an opportunity to talk a lot about what we've been working on, and also what's new in the field. And
then also for everyone else that's trying to connect with scholarship in different ways. So we want to talk about some of the top ones. And like Glenn already said, this is a joint venture today with BAR, of course. And then myself with Just So You Know, which is about bringing biblical archaeology typically on social media platforms. And we've got Gesher doing wonderful, amazing things, super exciting things coming down the piper. And I'll let Chris talk about that.
Why not? This is a film that we're working on at Gesher Media. It's called Legends of the Lost Ark. It's a documentary which also includes docudrama elements. We actually made an ark. It doesn't quite look like the one in Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. We think ours is a little bit more historically accurate, but we're really excited for this film to come out. And there's all kinds of social media stuff connected with this, podcasts and books, coming down the pipe that we're very excited about at Gesher Media, and TBD in terms of where it will be coming out to theaters near you, we hope, but it will be premiering at some point next year. We'll share on various podcasts. But in terms of this event, Erica and I have collaborated on what are the top finds. Like what constitutes a top find? How do you get to be in that vaunted list? And we have 10. We're not going to talk about all 10 of these.
No, because we're going to nerd out still.
Yes. We'll run out of time. But just some orienting with these top finds is we're doing them in chronological order. So anything that we talk about at the beginning is earlier. So we're moving, more recent in time. And so if your subject of interest is New Testament, you're going to have to wait till the end. This is also not a countdown. We're not talking about who are the best quarterbacks from 5 to 1. We're talking about the top 10, but they're not necessarily the ranked order.
That is true. And what I was going to say was I'm excited about this is because one of the things I love about archaeology is sometimes there are dramatic elements to it. So I'm super excited about that because I'm a fan of drama and history at the same time. So speaking of drama, let's get into it. Right out the bat, one of the top ones we wanted to talk about was Ramses' sarcophagus. Backstory. They found this fragment back in 2009. And at first, they knew that it was a part of a sarcophagus that belonged to 2 people. They knew who the second person was. And I'm going to butcher his name. He was a priest from the 21st dynasty.
He's the priest of Amun. So he's from Luxor, from
Yes.
Thebes. And they found this piece of a sarcophagus, but it was actually, as these things are, in at least the third use. We call it, by a fancy name, tertiary use. It was used as a tile in a Coptic monastery, but it originally was used by this priest, or we thought originally, but then they looked behind the inscription, and it turns out that this is none other than a fragment of Ramses II's granite sarcophagus.
Right.
And if you've heard of Ramses II, you might know he was a pretty important
significant dude. He's just a little pharaoh.
Yeah.
No big deal.
He was. And what's so fascinating about it is that this particular tomb, which is unfortunately was flooded at different times in history, is that it was looted multiple times,
right.
But most of those looting episodes happened in antiquity. And so one of the real questions about Ramses II is within his tomb is what was he encased within? What was it? What did it look like? And of course, all of us have in our mind when we think of a tomb, which pharaoh?
Tut.
King Tut, right? So the thought is if King Tut's tomb was filled with all of the wonderful treasures, including the golden coffin and the golden mask, and on and on and on. These, babushka dolls of all together of these golden boxes. How much more so would Ramses II's be like?
Right, and they're kind of Frederick Papoudou. I don't speak French, but he was the one who was able to find Ramses' name on the sarcophagus. Matter of fact, it had his throne name, which is super unique, right? But he came up with the theory that his sarcophagus would have been stacked like this. What was it called again? The dolls you said?
The what?
The babushka.
The babushka dolls, the Russian dolls.
It's got that vibe, though. They think that by the time of Seti I and Ramses, that they were really concerned with the looting. So they probably created a system. This is according to Dr. Frederick, that his mummy would have been in the wood coffin. The wood coffin would have been in the gold. The gold would have been in one of the stone sarcophagus. And then that would have been in another larger, just to try to prevent the looting, because looting was already a problem at that point. And so he's thinking that this was probably a mechanism they put in place to kind of help prevent that.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at this coffin here on the left, on the legs of this coffin, it's a wooden coffin that was made from cedar. There's debate as to who it belongs to. Some people think it's Horemheb. Most people think it's Ramses the First, or maybe it was first for Horemheb, then Ramses the First, the grandfather of Ramses the Second. But what happens over the course of the 20th or 21st dynasty is you start to have a systematic looting of the Valley of the Kings. So the very people that knew about where all these goodies were, they don't have access to Nubia. They don't have access to the wealth of the heyday of the 13th century. Right. And so why go far away when you have all these gold treasures nearby? And so this particular coffin is not only where Ramses II's mummy ends up after it's looted, but on his legs, you actually have what scholars call these dockets of, in this year, we moved Ramses II from this tomb to that tomb, and in this year we did this. And so this has been known for quite some time after its discovery, the discovery of the cache of where all these mummies were. But what happened to the coffin itself has not been known. What happened to the gold coffin? It was long taken. And outside of that was this alabaster coffin. And then this encasing granite coffin is one that was reused by this later high priest of Amun from Thebes. And that's where they found it, at Abydos. So it's a fantastic find.
But didn't his big brother reuse Merneptah's as well? They're believing that his older brother or stepbrother reused the
Yes,
Merneptah's.
I believe so. Yes, Merneptah's granite coffin was also used in this way. And so you see that there's this systematic usage of all of the New Kingdom goodies in this later period.
Right.
And so if we think about this from a biblical perspective, there's debate, as there is with everything in biblical studies, but most, if you were to poll the room of biblical scholars, most scholars would probably say, if there was an Exodus, and if we can know who the Pharaoh was, his name would probably be Ramses the Great, Ramses II, because of the reference in Exodus 1:11 to the store city of Ramses. And so if that's the case, then we have, the final resting place, the original final resting place of the biggest baddie in the Bible, Pharaoh. And what I was really struck by is, isn't it amazing, and I'll get into a little Christmas thing here, isn't it amazing that we have the smashed sarcophagus, or sarcophagi, plural, of both Ramses, the Pharaoh, and, maybe his dad says, I'm going to kill all the, the Jewish boys, the Israelite boys, and we have the smashed sarcophagus of Herod the Great, whose coffin was smashed, the sarcophagus was smashed, sometime in the Great Revolt. So we have tangible pieces of these enemies in both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament that we can look at. And it's really incredible.
Yes.
And I'll just add what I find interesting about this discovery, and so many discoveries really, is new discoveries are not necessarily those things coming new out of the ground.
Right.
That's what we always think of in terms of archaeology. But sometimes it's those things have been known for quite some time, or a very long time. And it's looking at them with fresh eyes, and in many cases now fresh technology, new technologies. And I'm not quite sure how the techniques they use to get to some of these earlier inscriptions, but new digital photographic techniques, photogrammetry, RTI, these things that allow us to get beneath inscriptions to earlier versions, earlier writings, really tells us a lot about these older discoveries. So.
Yeah, and in this case, it was published, I think, in 2017 or something, and they said, it's clear that there's an inscription underneath, but it's some unnamed prince.
Right. They thought
some unnamed prince turns out to be Ramses the Great. It's a very important inscription.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me was a lot of times amongst ourselves, we're talking about how artifacts or different things were reused, repurposed. And I think this one is a great demonstration of just how much things were reused. And we may get frustrated that we can't find the things because they were reused. And it's one of those important things that we're always trying to communicate to people is there was no Home Depot. There was no Lowe's. Like, I'm going to go get me a new sarcophagus, right? No Zales to put the gold diamonds on it. My brother worked up at the temple. He worked on the mummy. He know where the mummy is. He going to use Merneptah's. I'm going to use Ramses. It's that type of vibe. And I think sometimes in our Western modern, I'm going to go to the store and get. Even the idea of, I'm going to go use my friend's casket. I mean, I'm gonna go over to the cemetery, take that up and do that. That's not something that we perceive well. Where here, we're finding a number of artifacts where that's the norm. Where you're not using that auto burial container, I'm going to reuse that auto burial container. So it's this thing of where we're learning that type of cultural expression as well. It also makes me feel a little easy because I know a lot of people want us to be out here chasing the big finds. This is why sometimes you can't find the big finds because someone else is already using it. And so we got to find the other person that used it to get to it so we can find them. Right? So, well, that's with Ramses. Another one we kind of want to talk about was the deep sea late Bronze Age shipwreck. I really geeked out about this one. So we found Bronze Age shipwrecks before, but this one's further out into the seas, almost, I want to say 60 miles out. It's the only one we found deep sea, right? And it's exciting because there's all these whole vessels. And listen, if you don't know anything about archaeologists, we love some whole vessels. It brings joy to our heart because now we don't have to just try and figure it out from the rim or the handle. We can do the whole vessel. And this one has so many. It's massive. It's about 48 feet. Just from the vessels alone, they were able to measure. They haven't taken anything out. They just took one vessel from the end of the pile to two ends of the pile. So they only took out two. So they haven't really done any official deep sea work because since it's so deep, that's pretty expensive. That's a lot of manpower. It's easier to do when it's from the shore, but this one they haven't had a chance. But it's exciting because it's from a time period where we know that, especially in the area of Canaan, southern Levant, there's already this massive trade going on. And so this is one of those examples of they're not just doing it staying close to the shore. Initially, we thought that they only sailed to the shoreline. Yeah. This one, we don't have that.
This is potentially one of the most important finds. And we know it's important for a few reasons. One of the main reasons is we have these other shipwrecks that you're mentioning. The most famous one is Uluburun. The Uluburun shipwreck, and there's the Cape Caledonia one. These shipwrecks were found 50 yards offshore. This is found 60 miles offshore. Yeah. And the archaeologist who found it, it's like, you're seeing a scene from Titanic.
Yes, I thought about Titanic for real.
Down, trying to find it.
Yes, it's our moment.
And they literally say this is the last real frontier of archaeology is the deep sea, because what it will take to be able to excavate this ship is immense, and can't be done through diving. It'll have to be done through all kinds of underwater techniques. Yeah. But the fact that if they could ever recover some of this, it could tell us much about the ancient world. And who knows how many shipwrecks there are out in the sea that are still waiting to be found. And so from Uluburun, it's a time capsule because at the time you have this maritime trade that's connected as far away as far as we know, Britain to Afghanistan. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Parts of Africa,
ivories, Egypt, Canaan. And what's Canaan have? It has the olive oil and the wine. That's the things coming from Canaan. And so this is a great discovery, and potentially it will show up in a future great discoveries, because if they ever excavate it, it could be hugely significant.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Glenn, if they get into it, can we talk about it again?
Yeah, no, certainly. What I love about this find too is certainly this is from the Canaanite Bronze Age, and it adds great context to seafaring and trading during the late Bronze Age. But I think it also puts the early Phoenician expansion in a broader context as well. It's like within a couple of centuries, the Phoenicians are already getting out to Spain, to Tarshish. Yeah. And so finds like this allow us to see that there was this very strong, very well-developed maritime culture that was exploring the breadth of the Mediterranean world. And so the Phoenicians suddenly getting all the way to Spain is not surprising at all when you see there was this.
Right, and it's like, how do they get there? Like, are they just port hopping, from one place, or are they making these long stretches, across? And that's really, we don't know. And it's crazy to think, no one gave us a record of, if you want to get from this port to this port, there's how you do it.
They didn't use Waze.
They didn't use Waze.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But I think this one kind of helps us see that maybe there is this path that they are taking. Like, we have evidence. We wasn't sure, but now we're like, okay, they are getting out there in the middle and crossing these depths. I also thought what was fascinating was some of the vessels. So Uluburun had they had more variation. The other ships had more Cypriotic vessels, Cypriot, but this one was more so, the ones they grabbed were just really just Canaan.
Yeah, I mean, but the question is, did they only excavate the Canaanite portion or or is there another part of the ship when they went down and found it? Because what they were doing is it's part of a natural gas pipeline, and so that's what it wasn't intentional to find it.
Right.
But at Uluburun, they found things stacked very neatly.
Right.
So you had a row of Cypriot pitoi filled with Cypriot
and I think
vessels.
this one's 2 rows. From what they could tell, it was 2 rows. But they didn't get to the hull of the ship, which I think is also important too, because that would help us learn what design and types of wood they were using. So that one's important because it's just giving us more insight into maritime, like you were saying. So next we have the Hercules, Hydra, and Hasor. And this one's kind of fun. This one's kind of fun because it's getting to this amazing depiction. They found this at Hasor, yes?
Yeah, so this find, one of my favorite finds, because, I love mythology. I love these heroic stories. And if you're, you probably do too. I mean, you like Hercules, you like these stories. And it's been something that's told since the beginning, really, of literature. And one of the things that's been suggested in the past is how the Mesopotamian stories that we have, such as Gilgamesh and so on, actually make their way to Greek myth. And so the great heroes of Hercules or Zeus fighting Typhon ultimately probably had their origins in Marduk fighting Tiamat. And so this is one of those elements that is so important, not only because we constantly see this story of a hero fighting a 7-headed dragon, but the biblical text itself doesn't actually have that little component of the 7 heads. The Bible does talk about, these heroes, and usually associates Yahweh with killing Leviathan or defeating the dragon over and over again. But the 7-head aspect is something we can trace in Mesopotamia from like 2500 BC. We can see it. And I think there's an image of it here in a minute on a cylinder seal. And we can see it show up in Ugarit with Baal killing the 7-headed Lotan, which is the Ugaritic name for Leviathan. And we can see it all these other places. And then we have it, of all places, those of you who are New Testament oriented, in Revelation, right? That we have the 7-headed dragon of the sea. Yeah. But the missing link, of all places, ends up being Hatzor, where apparently this hero, we don't know who this hero is, probably not Hercules or Heracles. Maybe it's even a depiction of Yahweh. It could be a depiction of Baal. But whoever this gentleman is, he is about to kill a 7-headed serpent. So it's very, very fascinating.
To me, it's, this list they've put together here. I mean, this tells the story that these sort of shared motifs, these shared traditions, this kind of, in some sense, shared mythology that is formulated and reformulated as it's passed, probably orally in some cases, between cultures. Mm-hmm. And they sort of remake it in their own guise, in their own cultural framework. And that's what I find so fascinating. This iconography, this imagery. Absolutely.
And the question is, how does it get passed? And this is one of the questions they did in the original article by Christoph Eulinger, he says, is this getting passed orally, or actually, were they depicting it on walls and seeing it's passed that way? Because the gap between some of these events is really interesting. So I think this is, I don't know if it's my favorite find, but it's pretty close to the top.
And it's just a beautiful piece too.
It's a beautiful piece.
And it's this big.
Yeah.
This big.
It's a beautiful piece. Love it, love it. Here's a big one that kind of made a big splash. A genie in Jerusalem. They found this wonderful piece here, not too far from the...
Yeah, they found it in the Davidson Center. And so if you've ever visited
the
Robinson's Arch, they're doing ongoing conservation work and some salvage excavations there. And they found it while they were excavating around the Herodian Street.
Yeah. It's remarkable. It's a depiction of a winged genie or demon. And one of the details is you can see how the genie is masterfully engraved there. But also what's on there is a name, a Jewish man's name, 2 names actually. And one of the things they notice about it is that one may have been handwritten by the owner and not by the maker because of the 2 difference in quality. The quality of the genie versus the quality of the name, it's like, did the person add their name later? But it is a Jewish name.
It is, yeah. And the name we have is actually probably not the same person mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, but the seal is from around the same time period.
It's a part of the name in First Chronicles.
In First Chronicles and in the genealogy. And this actually reminds me of ossuaries, Second Temple ossuaries, where you can have absolutely stunning carvings on them. And then just afterwards, somebody says, well, I want to remember this is cousin Yochanan. Let's just really quickly add it to the side. And you're like, this doesn't go. But that's what we have here. It's just a beautiful piece that definitely has Assyrian connections, Neo-Assyrian. And this reminds us that in the 8th and the 7th century, the kingdom of Judah, Jerusalem, was under the foot of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. It continued to pay its taxes year after year. And that's actually, I think, one of the important things about it is it shows us this close connection between far-off places like Nineveh and Jerusalem. And we can think of especially the story of Hezekiah and Sennacherib in the year of 701. But I actually have a slightly different take on it than the authors do.
Okay.
I think that I wouldn't call this, because the terminology is really all over the place. It's a genie. Okay, so you think of Aladdin and Robin Williams.
That part,
Is it a demon? So is this from hell? Like what do you mean by that? You have to actually have a concept of where they're drawing on it. And so when Assyriologists mention this, they're connecting this with a divine being that's a protective spirit that protects entrances or protects statues or protects kings. It's usually near thrones. The Bible calls those not demons or genies. It calls them cherubim. And that's what I think this likely is. In fact, you have here from Ashurnasirpal's reliefs. This is at the British Museum, and you can see the close correspondence between these two beings. One is this big. The other is like 8 foot tall.
And I think it was like an amulet too. It's got a hole in the bottom of it for them to put in there.
Yeah. It's probably worn as a type of protection.
Yeah. I was going to ask y'all both about that. Given it's found, it's definitely Assyrian-ish, but he's got this very Jewish name. One of the articles suggests that it's just him taking this amulet to fit in with the natural culture of the time. Could it be a blending of the beliefs? I mean, what do you think this points to?
I mean, my thought is, and we've done a lot of work on this for different film projects that we're working on, and I've had the amazing privilege, the fun privilege of trying to create 3D reconstructions of Solomon's temple, the tabernacle, and trying, what archaeological objects do we have to flesh out a text like 1 Kings 6 and 1 Kings 7. And so, like we can see in this reconstruction, we've used everything from an archaeological object. So the walls are covered on cherubim that come from ivories that were made by Phoenicians, but ultimately plundered and brought to Assyria. Today, you can find them at the British Museum in the Met. So they got a very, very interesting history. So to me, it's very likely, it's very possible that what's being depicted there is actually the statues that sat inside of the Holy of Holies in the temple.
Really?
Because if you remember in 1 Kings chapter 6, 1 Kings chapter 7, we have a description of the house of Yahweh, the holy place. And at the back, where the ark is placed, you have 2 massive olive wood statues covered in gold with their wings outstretched, just as they are.
Right.
And they go from one side of the Holy of Holies to the other. And so, this is in Jerusalem. Yes, it has Assyrian elements, but the Assyrian elements are heavily influenced by Egypt. They're heavily influenced by Phoenicia.
You just think they're taking that imagery, they're applying it to their culture. Like, I've seen this imagery. I'm going to take that imagery. I'm not necessarily buying into that religious belief system as much as that imagery matches my own. You think that's something that could be happening?
And I think it's also fascinating with this find is, more and more, especially as they excavate in Jerusalem and the city of David area, the Givati parking lot, and they look at these sort of 8th, 7th century levels. And at the time when the Assyrians were dominant within the region, and clearly from the Lachish reliefs, of course, it just, conquered, utterly destroyed Lachish and other places. But there seems to be a period where there's kind of an Assyrian peace sort of established. It's sort of rather vibrant, cosmopolitan cultural world that's connecting all the sort of realms and kingdoms that fall under the Assyrian Empire. And more we're finding evidence in Jerusalem and especially the elite, the wealthy, being part of that sort of cosmopolitan world established by the Assyrians. And we think of Assyria being a rather brutal regime and harsh and oppressive. But it seems like there was a period where Jerusalem was doing quite well because of the Assyrians. Really.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that, it makes me think of, the epic trash talk that happens on the walls outside of Jerusalem, where the three Assyrian officials and the three Judahite officials are talking back and forth, and they're saying, don't talk in Yehudit, don't talk in Hebrew, talk in Arabic. They talk in the official language, which shows that the officials that are in Judah, they know the language of diplomacy. They are maybe not on a first name basis with these Assyrians, but they know the proper discourse. And so something like this gives us a tangible piece of probably an official who knew about this aspect of life, and to be better off is to be closely associated with the cultural realities of political life.
Yeah. And I like what you said, though, about that possibly being a matter of taking imagery, connecting to imagery. People do that a lot all the time, where there may be a depiction that I may associate with my belief system or my religious system, but I'm going to borrow that depiction. I honestly didn't even think about that. I really was trying to lean towards more synergism, like he's blending. I did read one where they did say that it was probably a reuse. It came from Assyria, but then the person was in Jerusalem. They adapted it as their own. That was one of the options that was put forth. I mean, it would make sense. The detail, the quality of it, I mean, that would make sense. That would line.
It does. And I just say, how do we recreate what's going on in the temple? We can't do it with text. We have a description of a text, and then we have contemporary art.
Right.
And what I'm saying is this is found right next to the temple, and it's an exact representation of what the biblical text says was within the temple. So there's a lot of room for discussion.
And I think both of those things can still be true. Honestly, real talk. If it's still coming from Assyria and this person picks it up and he identifies it with what he sees in the temple, this looks just like this. It may have come from Assyria, but man, it looks the same. I'm going to take it as my own. Again, people do that all the time. We see that in cultures where they see an object, they'll take it and adapt it and rename it to a thing. This is a totally not archaeological example, but I'm going to give it because I think it's great. I know what garbanzo beans are. I did not know that chickpeas and garbanzo beans were the same. And so imagine my mind blownness when I was like, oh, they're one and the same. Who would have known? But again, that's because from my cultural perspective, all I knew was garbanzo beans. I know these beans. When I labeled them garbanzo beans, right? So I think it's one of those things where we see them in everyday cultural things where I see this thing as this. It looks like my thing. So I'm going to put the garbanzo bean, but then my friend would come along and no, those are chickpeas. And I'm like, no, it's garbanzo. But so it's not super archaeological, but sometimes I have to break it down like that. I'm not a high speed scholar like Chris. I got to bring it all the way down and then build it back up just so that I can understand how these are real life, real culture. When the Jewish person found, he probably didn't have the term Assyrian and said, this is an Assyrian artifact and I'm going to write my Jewish name here in the phase 10 of blah, blah, blah. Of course they're not thinking that way, but I think that could also still be true as well. And again, I think it just shows the blending of culture that much more. And two, playing into the role of it's a Syrian friendly depiction. I can still honor my belief system, but also blend in with what's established and along. So it's like peaceable expressionism. So no, I think that's great.
And then the Babylonians came along.
And then the Babylonians came and we're done with it. The next one we have is the Herculaneum Scrolls. This one was super dope. I loved it. Super excited. I love technology things. So when I saw this made me think of Chris anyway. Chris loves technology. I had an opportunity of working with Chris in Burna. And one of the reasons I was excited to go to Burna is because of the technology they're doing at this site. It's magnificent, guys. So anyway, he sent it to me. I thought about it. So it's awesome. They found these scrolls in the, I'm going to butcher it, Herculaneum. Snap.
Is in this twice.
Listen, Greek is not my jam, so no. Like 1,000 of these scrolls, they had been, because of the volcano activity, they had been charred and charcoaled. There's a great illustration here. And what happened is they froze that way. Well, over time, they did try to unroll them, but unrolling them, they would go to ashes or fall apart. So it was not good. They did a few. They were only a few, but it's just not the business. So they've been doing these CT scans of them. And from the CT scans, they've been able to get writings from them. And it's awesome because this past year, they were able to get some letters, but this past year they had a contest. I mean, and we need to have more contests. $700,000 for the people that could translate the
BAS
most.
sponsored, of course.
Oh, yeah. 700.
BAS
Do you know how
sponsors?
much archaeological work we could get for $700,000 prizes? No. Team of students were able to translate like 15 passages, is that correct, of this text. It turned out to be from a philosopher. I forget his name, but it's some of his writings. And it's just awesome. It's creating a new avenue because when we find these, can you imagine if we'd had this for the Ketef Hinnom amulets or things like that, where you can scan them, we won't have to, destructive archaeology, how we can be. This is one of those opportunities.
Right. And with this discovery, it was proven proof of concept, I think something like 7 or 8 years ago, because there was a scroll found in a synagogue in Getty.
In Getty scroll.
And because of the particular ink that was used on the scroll, it was magnetic. There was little pieces of metal within the actual ink. And so they came out with, we can read this amazingly from these scans. And so the sort of the granddaddy of them all, of this type of thing is from Herculaneum. This was found in 1750, right? 26 years before the Declaration of Independence. I mean, this is an old discovery. And so these lumps of charcoal are just sitting there.
They call it the silent library.
What's in them? What's in them? And so they've been able to look at 5% of one scroll, and they found the location in writing of the tomb of a pretty important guy, Plato. You may have heard of him at the Academy of Athens. Mm-hmm. And so potentially, Vesuvius strikes Herculaneum, Pompeii in 79 AD, right around the destruction of Jerusalem. What's in these things? I mean, first of all, we don't know. It could be anything.
Right.
Probably it's some of the most important writings that were collected at the time related to various strands of philosophy. We could have lost writings that we only have paraphrases of. Right. Of the great epic cycle of the Trojan War. I mean, we thankfully have the Iliad. We thankfully have the Odyssey, but there's whole swaths of the mythical stories that are part of everybody knows about, the Trojan horse. Right. Maybe there's a fuller version waiting in this lump of charcoal. Maybe so it's truly exciting. And the guy who's heading it up has said, the greatest discovery of the 20th century was the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he says, using technology in the 21st century, maybe we'll be able to make the greatest discovery. And the great thing is, if they're able to continue to do this, you'll be able to see it develop slowly over time. Right. And so it's an incredible discovery.
But it's funny because the part that they did decipher, for context, they found it in the mansion, this wealthy space. And the part they translated talks about the good of having a lot of things. And does it bring pleasure? And I was like, well, that's hilarious, right? But that's the passage that they deciphered.
And it's also, I find this story fascinating, and this idea that these sort of burned to a crisp scrolls have been around for ages, and we've been able to do nothing with them. And unlocking this sort of vast treasure of ancient knowledge is just amazing to think about. But also, I mean, we often think, especially things like AI, get a bad rap, and sort of we think about these things are going to destroy our society, and they very well might. But technology put to extremely good use to help us solve problems that archaeologists and tech scholars have had, technology doing good things to allow scholars to find out new things about the past. And so whether it's AI, CT scans to get beneath these sort of burnt scrolls and actually reveal layer by layer these sort of layers of ancient text, it's a good story about technology, which I think is great.
I would just add to that, it's also a reason why archaeologists need to record data that they might not know what they're to do with, because we don't know, the classic stooge of archaeologists is Robert Stewart, Andrew McAllister, who destroyed Gesher. And we look back at his stuff and say, what in the heck were you doing? And he didn't record it. We can't even follow his plan. And so we have to excavate and record in a very rigorous manner, because someone will ask questions down the line that we are not asking now. We have to record data in the most up-to-date way as possible. And so that's why we do photogrammetry in the field now. We're recording point data because in 20, 30 years, the ability that people will have to access that is beyond what we can know now. And so it's just a great example of how archaeologists need to continue to adapt and continue to think about not only now, but what future archaeologists will do with the data.
And that's the
scan.
That's the scan.
That's what they found. I mean, that's
the scan.
Yeah. So if you can read, Koine Greek, you can read it.
It talks about pleasure and whether the abundance of goods available can affect the amount of pleasure they give in this mansion. So I thought that was pretty funny. Now I threw this one in this because, as Glenn said, that I look at sexual research, and we already know that Pompeii's got a lot going on. It's no surprise, right? But they found this tiny house that had more vivid depictions. I think it's important to look at sexual culture because sexual culture oftentimes gives us insight into other different aspects of culture that we tend to overlook or gives us norms. And so when they found this in Pompeii, and again, it's a bunch of them in Pompeii, but this one was so vivid and so beautiful. It's my favorite of the years on the list because this is just my area of research. So anytime I see that, building this map of understanding sexual practices, sexual cultures throughout the ancient Near East in general, I just think it's fascinating. So,
well, it's, Pompeii, it's not even fair. When you go to the site, comparing it to other archaeologists, every room is complete except the ceiling, and sometimes it's still there.
Yeah.
But I thought this was really interesting, and if we are to make a biblical connection, because one of the scenes shows a Greek myth of Hippolyta and Phaedra, which the son of Theseus, the wife of Theseus, and it's a classic woman scorned story, which we have in the Bible. This is Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And we have a story of this that goes all the way back to one of the oldest pieces of Egyptian literature, the tale of two brothers. And so this motif of, the woman scorned and him turning on the person that didn't give in to her wiles is something we can see at Pompeii and told in this great Greek myth.
Yes.
We can see it all the way in the book of Genesis with Potiphar's wife and Joseph.
But then you also see the woman not scorned who was not scorned. So there are women scorned, but there are also women not scorned. And I think that's important for the discourse of women in archaeological records. Sometimes we're only depicted as the victim or not able to participate, not being agents of their own lives in historical contexts. And I think sometimes these depictions help to contribute to that understanding of women and the roles that they played in ancient society. They weren't just helpless victims. Sometimes they were the women's scorn, but sometimes they were like, no, I'm the scorner. So.
And it's also just the case that, almost I think every month now, there's a new headline coming out about some fascinating painting they found or fresco they found in Pompeii. And I think it's in the broader context of they're really trying to expand and build the archaeological park at Pompeii, develop the infrastructure. And so whenever you do that, of course, even if you're trying to preserve, you're also having to sort of restore, excavate, reveal portions of previously discovered buildings that haven't been excavated before. So that's why you're seeing all these sort of paintings and new frescoes coming out, is because they're constantly doing work at this site. So.
It's like it's just flooding in at this point.
Yeah,
it really is.
Like we've had so many news stories on our website about Pompeii in the past 2 years. I get them confused now.
Yeah.
Well, and we wanted to kind of close on the granddaddy of them all, Paul's prison in Caesarea. This was such a big deal. You can talk about famous guys all day. Paul's one of those guys. And we know that Paul was up in some jails all the time. And up until this point, we knew he was in jail in Caesarea, but we had not found the space where he was at in Caesarea.
Right. And so in organizing and going back and forth on this list, we haven't chosen what's the top find? But I would say if this is in fact proven to be correct, it's probably number one. And so just in terms of the context of the find, the palace of Herod the Great at Caesarea is not new. It has been known for quite some time. And the fact that Felix and Festus and Agrippa characters that appear in the book of Acts would have been in this palace. That's not the new find. And actually, this could be something that could be in bar. It hasn't really made any news, but I just was compiling this list and I got this blurb from a tour guide in Israel, and they said the Terra Sancta Christian media is about to film something in what they believe to be the prison of Paul in Caesarea. And so I haven't seen what all of the argumentation is, but essentially what you have happening in the upper courtyard, where there was a garden at some point, and you can see there on the aerial image there, is that there is an underground cistern that apparently was pre-aqueduct. It was part of the water supply for the palace that went out of its use and then continued to be used potentially as a prison within the palace. Right. Now, why this is so interesting is, of course, the Apostle Paul is not only appears before Agrippa in this famous speech where he gives for the third time his road to Damascus experience, but he spends 2 years. The text literally says he spends 2 years at Caesarea being held there because Felix, the procurator, wants him to pay him something, and he wants to get paid off before he's sent on to Rome. And so this is potentially an incredible find. I really can't wait to see what's going to happen in terms of the reports, but it's very, very impressive.
Yeah. No, and I think it's great for providing a visual context. I think sometimes when we don't have the artifacts or the spaces haven't been uncovered, sometimes we have a hard time visually contextualizing what that would have looked like. And I don't know about others, but I know for myself, I usually revert back to Western concepts of jails or prisons. So it's always great to find spaces like this because it can help us really understand the context of Paul's experience when he's in these prisons. I also thought what was interesting was its similarities to other prisons that they found, that same shape, that same space. So it's really showing us Roman prison styles.
Right. Agreed. And we don't know what happens in the years. It's usually dated to like 57, 59, somewhere in there before Paul is going to Rome. But one of the options that's thrown out there for the so-called prison epistles is that they were written, of course, while Paul was in prison. And the three options we have are that it's written in Ephesus, it's written in Caesarea, or it's written in Rome. So if Caesarea is the place, and if this is the place that he was held, you're looking at, that's 4 epistles. That would be, 13 divided by 4, almost a third of the area of Paul's epistles in this area that he could have written. So it ties you right into that world. It ties you into the moment of the early church, even if it's not where he, wrote the text. Right. He was here at this location, and that's, again, an incredible thing.
All I can say is this is a classic bar article.
Oh, yeah.
So as soon as y'all learn more, you let me know, so we can get in the magazine.
It's exciting. I just love when we find spaces that really connect us, almost directly connect us to the world of the Bible. So this one was exciting for that reason to me. So
that's the last find. We did other finds, but that's what we thought we could get through in the time.
Yeah, we didn't want to overwhelm.
Well, very good. Well, thank y'all so much. This was I love what y'all did with this year. This is great. Thanks the audience. Hopefully they'll come back to do this again next year. It's a lot of fun. I really like this format too. So thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Thanks everybody.